Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to another episode of Corpse Club, the official podcast for DailyDead.com. My name is Heather Wixson, and as you know, it is Women in Horror Month. So for this week's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by Meagan Navarro from BloodyDisgusting.com as we dive into the career and legacy of none other than Debra Hill. How are you, Meagan?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing wonderful. For those of you, I mean, obviously, if you're listening to us, Lord knows you probably have a good idea of what's happening over at Bloody Disgusting, because you guys have been reigning supreme like pretty much since I got into this industry. So, but if you wanted to sort of fill people in, because you write a lot of really fun retrospectives, you do a lot of the reviews and stuff, and I was, just hoping maybe you could talk a little about sort of what you do over there at Bloody.
I think, everything.
Yes.
I do the reviews, the main reviews. I do a lot of retrospectives. I just write about horror like all the time. I have 2 columns that were weekly but are now monthly about creatures, 80s creatures, and then just like the more gory stuff. So Butcher Block, and it came from the 80s. And then everything in between. I just write a crap ton about our favorite genre. So yeah.
I haven't heard the terminology crack ton in a long time, so I think this is our call to bring that back.
Yep.
Well, I love, because when we talked about doing this, we were trying to figure out the topic, and you were the one who suggested Debra Hill, and I was like, oh my God, yes. And I really love that you sort of brought her up, because we were talking about this. But when you go online and you look up information on Debra Hill, there just isn't a lot out there. And I think for me, that makes me really sad as a fan, because of who she was, the things that she managed to accomplish in the industry in a very short time, respectively, just because her life was cut short, sadly, by cancer. And it's time we bring back the respect that Debra Hill deserves, I think.
Fully agree. The reason that I thought of her is that, Women in Horror Month kind of exists to boost women, and obviously make them more equal in the industry. But there tends to be a spotlight on directors only, or final girls, and things that are more like front and center. And Debra Hill was a vital pioneer in horror. And one of the things that she's known for saying is, I hope someday there won't be a need for women in film, that it will be people in film, equal pay, equal rights. And that's kind of what the purpose is for women in horror, but we're not there yet. Like, it kind of makes me sad that she said that so long ago, and we're still like, we haven't made a whole lot of headway in that regards. But because I think that quote is the embodiment of Women in Horror Month, and because I feel like people like her are just as important in the film industry. Producers don't get a whole lot of love because they're kind of jack of all trades. So I felt like we needed to expand horizons, I guess, if you will.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because these days, I think there's more producers that have become personalities. And I just, because obviously the landscape has changed as in terms of like who gets to have those conversations. We get to see, and obviously this is not a slight against him in any sort of way, but
right.
Like we get to see Jason Blum being out there and being a mouthpiece for all of the different films that Blumhouse is doing. And he should be, because he's obviously a driving force in that company. I mean, we wouldn't have nearly, all these different franchises that we have right now if it wasn't for him,
right.
And his passion and stuff like that. But when you look at 20 or 30 years ago, Debra Hill wasn't given those opportunities to talk.
Right.
And I get it, obviously everybody wanted to talk to, John Carpenter because he's John Carpenter, and obviously we should talk to John Carpenter. But people should have been talking to Debra Hill too, because I mean, she, even beyond the stuff that she was doing with John, I mean, she was starting her own production companies with other women. She was, she was basically lifting up other talent in the industry as well, both male and female.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have some of these really great talents, people like Gillian Hurd. I'm totally blanking. I think it's Linda Obst is the one that she worked with. Jeffrey Chernoff, who Ironically enough, I watch Halloween 2 at night, and he's I think like a PA or something on that, and he's like behind Black Panther now.
Yeah.
Um, so it's always interesting to me that she was definitely somebody who was really
J-
good. I was gonna say she's really great at what she was doing, but she was also really great at finding great talent to sort of foster in the industry.
James Cameron was once her visual effects guy.
Yes, I always love the stories of Jim Cameron basically like just puttering around at the Corman Studios, because like I'm just because like whenever I do like interviews for like effects people and they're like, oh yeah, he was working on doing backdrops for like Humanoids from the Deep or something like that or whatever, and I'm just like
He did
just
do a lot of backdrop paintings, didn't he?
he did. I think Escape from New York was one of them too. But like it's like just crazy to me like that if anything should give aspiring filmmakers hope, it's that you don't know where you're going to end up. So I think it's important, and I also think Debra's career is a testimony to that. Is that it's great to get in the industry and just go into directing, but also like she did everything before she was producing and writing, and I think
Right.
that's important.
She did everything from like gophering to, I mean, she knew the industry in and out, and I think that's what made her such a savvy producer in the first place, is that she was just well entrenched, and she'd elbows deep in all of the, even the low jobs on the totem pole. She knew everything. She knew the industry.
No, absolutely. And I'm curious because, like, I mean, it took me a while as a kid to sort of start putting names together. I think
Same.
actually John Carpenter was like the one that sort of first hit me only because I think it was like when I finally saw They Live. And I was like, wait, this is the guy who made the Michael Myers movie? And I was like, okay, that's weird. So I think he was one of the first names that I sort of started to put two and together. I mean, actors were different because they're there and
Right,
everybody
you
knows
see them.
actors.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, do you remember like at what point like Debra Hill herself like kind of hit your radar?
It's obviously a lot later in life. Like as a kid, I wouldn't have known. I think probably I didn't really start getting into the behind the scenes people until maybe like teenage years. And probably at some point, like the more you read about your favorite movies, the more you start to uncover. So I'm pretty positive at some point, and I don't know when, but it was like Halloween and reading about Halloween specifically and what she contributed to the characters, between casting Laurie, to writing the female characters, the town of Haddonfield itself. So I think that was like the easy gateway to Debra Hill for me.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the first times I really realized it was when I finally bought Clue on VHS.
Oh yeah.
Because it was like when you it's one thing to like when you go in the video store and you could like you look at the artwork and you're like, oh, I'm gonna rent this and I'm gonna rent this, but when you actually owned it, like you could study it. And I always studied the Clue box because like there's just the artwork was interesting, and there was just something about it. And I remember seeing her name and I was like, wow, why do I know that name? And it was like, oh, Halloween. But it didn't even dawn on me that she had worked with John so much beyond that.
Yeah.
It probably wasn't until high school. Gosh, I think it was. Yeah, you know what it was? It was because I had a cinema studies class my senior year, and we watched The Fisher King, and that was when my teacher started talking about Debra Hill,
Oh wow.
and I was like, wait, what? And it just all like the tumblers like fell into place, and I was like, wait, are you kidding me? Like it didn't even dawn, like totally went over my head that this woman was like behind a lot of the movies that I grew up loving, like things, obviously like the Halloween movies, The Fog, Adventures in Babysitting, because
Oh,
like
I love that one.
oh my god, like being from Chicago, like it's a rule that you have to love Adventures in Babysitting. So thank God it's a fun and great movie. I think it's one of the rare PG-13 movies that got two F-bombs in it.
Oh wow. I don't even remember. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah, because I think it's like when they're on the train and they're like, don't like, because we tend to not swear on the show or drop F-bombs as much, but they're like, don't fuck with the babysitter or whatever.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I do
And
remember that.
So it's interesting to me, like, because it didn't even dawn on me. And then, when you kind of go and you start trying to pull these pieces together, and you're like, wow, she really, at a time when, I mean, it's still hard out there for women. I mean, as I mentioned, Galen Hurd was one of the people that, sort of was under her wing for years. And obviously Gail has come into her own as a powerhouse producer and creator.
Sure.
But back then, I mean, like, I was looking it up. I'm like, I can't even, there's so few female producers at the time. And it sort of blows my mind. Like, how integral she was, to so many different facets. Like, we owe her so much for horror, but she was really doing a lot of different stuff, like, everywhere. And I don't think she gets enough credit for that.
No, she dabbled in everything. I think, obviously she had a long-running partnership with John Carpenter, obviously, but I mean, she produced The Dead Zone. Like, that's an amazing movie. It's like, so she did obviously horror, she did comedy, she did Big Top Pee-wee. She did everything, like every genre. I think that I can't say that I know her, obviously, but what I do know of her work, it's storytelling is what I think she loved most. And she nailed it time and time
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I think, obviously I am a whore for Stephen King adaptations.
Hmm.
Like, give me them all. I don't care, good, bad, whatever. And in between, I will completely, I'm all about Stephen King adaptations. And it's so interesting to me because, like, the Dead Zone doesn't get brought up enough. I feel like,
It
especially,
doesn't.
like, it is Stephen King, it is David Cronenberg, and you have Christopher Walken,
And
and we're
he's
like,
so good in it.
yeah. And I'm just like, I don't understand why, we don't talk more about the Dead Zone, because that movie, is pretty vital. I mean, I know there was, like, the TV series that actually had a really decent run. I think it was, like, on USA or something like that with Anthony Michael Hall, but, like, that movie is, I rewatched it last year, I want to say, and I was like, man, why don't every time I watch it, I'm like, why don't I watch this more? I watch Silver Bullet like 100 times a year. But who can resist Corey Haim Little in Werewolves? So, but yeah, the Dead Zone is a really fantastic adaptation.
It is, I think, yeah, like you said, I think it's one of the more underrated ones too, which is a shame. But I feel like there's a timelessness to it, especially considering today's current, like, political climate, that makes the Dead Zone even more worth revisiting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of my favorite stories is that doing all the book stuff that I've been doing over the years, is that Deborah inadvertently was sort of a big piece of the pie, so to speak, when it comes to the launch of K&B. Which I didn't even realize until I was talking to Greg and Howard, because when they had started K&B, like, they were really kind of struggling to sort of find their footing, as their own company, because at that time, like, there were so many different companies out there, everybody was vying for jobs, and she brought them in to do the cadavers for Gross Anatomy.
Wow.
And that became a breakup because they became more than just guys who could do crazy splatter effects and horror. And in some ways that legitimized them, which is really interesting to me, because she could have gone to anybody and she went to them. So I always think that's really interesting. But I remember talking to both Greg and Howard about that, and they were like, yeah, had it not been for Gross Anatomy, the the type of work we were doing probably wouldn't have branched out nearly as much as it did, or as quickly as it did. And they both credited her for, bringing them into it. So I always thought that was kind of interesting.
That's a lovely story. It's like she wasn't just responsible for directors, She here's, like, the special effects makeup wizards now that are well known, and, like, especially Greg on The Walking Dead, which is also produced by Galen Hurd, which was, Debra Hill was her mentor. It's like 6 degrees of Debra Hill.
I was just gonna make that joke. Like, we should play 6 degrees of Debra Hill. Yeah, no, it's fantastic, because it just proves that, like, it can be such a cutthroat industry where you almost feel like you have to protect what's yours. And I almost think in some ways it's almost like that with journalism in a way. Like everybody's
Yeah.
like, oh, I gotta, I have to be the one that does this.
Sure.
And I just love the fact that it didn't seem like that was like that for her. Um, she obviously wanted the opportunities for herself to, be successful and do things. And I know she really wanted to get into directing more, but ultimately she was about making opportunities for others, which is really cool, especially again when you're talking about like the 80s and 90s when everything was so competitive and there really was like this hierarchy back then.
And
I mean, I know there's a hierarchy now, but if it feels a little looser where somebody might break out and suddenly things kind of shift a little bit and you just kind of never know where it's going to come from. Where back there it was kind of like, oh, you get in with a studio and that's it. You're in. And you're just doing what you're doing. But yeah, I just think that's really interesting. And obviously, a lot of this, of course, stems from Halloween,
yes.
and it's one of those like I'm sure you agree. I watch Halloween a lot. But I think every time I watch it, I re-fall in love with the girls and their relationships in this movie.
For
Um,
sure.
and I think that was the smartest thing John Carpenter ever could have done was encourage Deborah to write with him for that
Yes.
script because I don't think, and I don't mean this as any just any knock to John Carpenter because he's a freaking legend.
Right.
And I don't think he's listening, nor does he care. But to have her come in and give an authentic voice to the women of that movie was so essential. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why it works as well as it does.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, he deserves a lot of credit for, she was a woman. Obviously, they were involved at the time when they were making Halloween, but he helped boost her up, So this movie kind of made both of their careers, but he didn't have to. He was the director, but he knew she wanted to direct and thought that the best way for her to do that was to go through, get better, hone your craft at writing, and you can probably sharpen your toolbox for directing later on. And yeah, I completely agree. Like the writing of the women is what essentially made everybody copycat Halloween. Like this was the birth of the golden age of slashers, and it's what quote unquote established the rules that everybody was like trying to copy, to emulate the success of Halloween. And I think it has to do with these women, how they were fully formed characters and they felt like real teen girls.
Yeah, although admittedly, like, and I say this is somebody who falls asleep to Halloween 2 every night. Not Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, because I don't
Right.
know that I could, but because we always have a movie on playing when we go to sleep. But it's always interesting to me the departure that Laurie takes in part 2 versus part 1,
Yeah.
where she's not nearly quite as an active participant in her own story, which is always kind of a bummer, which however anybody feels about Halloween 2018, I at least like that Laurie was proactive again.
Yeah.
For as broken as she was still proactive. But it's interesting to me because I watch Halloween 2 a lot and I'm like, boy, imagine if Laurie was like way more take charge in this movie. But ultimately, like she's in a hospital bed and she's kind of doped up on drugs and stuff, and there's actually this like whole subplot that they cut out, but it's in the TV version where the doctor's actually like drunk and has overdosed her on meds and crazy stuff like that. But yeah, it's interesting to me because I think that's why, you know, a lot of people sort of look down on the original Halloween too, and I get it. I don't disagree whatsoever. It's more of just like a comfort movie, I think, for me. But I do think like when you look at how well those women characters work in the original, I mean, they really set the tone for basically female characters in the 80s. Like I
Yeah.
think that was like had they not been as strong as they were, I don't know what we would have gotten as a response.
It is interesting though because the takeaway was that they were promiscuous girls and Lori was the virgin and that's why she became the final girl when that's not really what the intent was. It's like these like normal teens, they're distracted and in their own kind of personal bubble that they're not noticing and Lori just happens to be smart and observant. And
Yeah.
that's why I think.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's why I think, the movie works.
Yeah, and I mean ultimately too, because like obviously the rules came up, and Scream helped redefine those for us, where you don't have sex, you don't do drugs, you don't drink,
Mhm.
but Laurie smokes weed in the movie,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and I always love the scene where she's on the phone and she's kind of giggling with Annie because I'm like she's totally stoned in that scene. I was like, she's taking care of a child and she's stoned. And I'm just like, but she's not punished for it. So it's always interesting to me that everyone's like, oh, well, Halloween set the rules for like, how you're supposed to survive a slasher movie. And I'm like, but it
But
didn't.
it
Like,
didn't. It just, that's the interpretation. Like, that's kind of the basic takeaway. Like, how can we emulate the success of Halloween? Well, Lori didn't have sex and she lived. The end. Like, yeah, she was pretty into Ben Tramer. She probably would have. She just happened to be a responsible babysitter.
I'm so excited because I don't know if this is real. I know Tommy Doyle is coming back for Halloween Kills, but I really am hoping we get Ben Tramer. I really want that.
Right?
I've wanted nothing more in my life ever since poor Ben Tramer blew up in the original Halloween 2, where I was just like, oh man, what are the odds that it's the one kid that Lori likes and he ends up
And
like
yeah.
gets roasted, in a really horrific car accident. And I'm like, gosh, I really want that for her. Where like maybe she's at the hospital and she comes in and like one of the orderlies is like Ben Tramer.
They should
So
have a Ben Tramer. They really should, because if they ignored everything in Halloween 2, then Ben Tramer's still out there somewhere. Even if he's like happily married somewhere in Haddonfield and it's just like this nod of what could have been. Like they should put him in there, at least as an
yeah,
Easter egg.
right, definitely. Although we never know who Lori married, but I
No,
don't
we
I don't
don't.
feel like I don't feel like it was Ben Tramer.
I feel like that would have been too on the nose.
So I want Lori to at least have that. I mean, if she ends up dying, she dies. Okay, I'm gonna be sad about it, of course. But like ultimately, I just want that. If we're bringing things full circle, let's just go all in.
Yeah, we're bringing the kids back, for crying out loud. So let's bring them back. Like, do you think? I guess we'll find out in the movie. I'm like, do you think that she was ever allowed to babysit those kids again, or if she would have even wanted to?
I'm willing to bet that those parents probably never left their houses again or their children unattended because I don't think I would.
No.
Like, if your kid's almost hacked to bits by a serial killer, like maybe mommy and daddy stays home pretty more frequently now. Like, just keep an eye
Yeah.
on things. Yeah, it was always so interesting to me because like I don't really watch reality TV very often, but I had like it didn't even dawn on me that Kyle Richards was Kyle Richards, who's
Yeah.
in
I
like
had no
it's like
idea.
how she's in the Beverly Hills Housewives show. I have no idea,
I have no idea. I
but
mean,
I
I
know
know,
she's on one of them.
but yeah, who would have
But
thought?
yeah, yeah, like she just became like like a and basically a reality star celebrity, which I think is really funny. So I'm curious to see how that's gonna come full circle too. But
They're all
although
screwed up.
I would have liked Paul Rudd as Tommy Doyle coming back, but obviously that wasn't going to happen because he was busy with Ghostbusters and stuff. But speaking of Anthony Michael Hall, there you go.
Right?
We'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's so interesting to me, like that these characters that ultimately, like in any other franchise, might have just been like tossaway characters, are still integral to the story. I'm so fascinated by how that's going to play out. So basically, what I'm saying is, I need to watch Halloween Kills like right now.
You probably get that opportunity, right? There's like a test screening somewhere along the way between now and October. I'm guessing.
If I well, I know they had one already. If I thought I had a good poker face,
Ah,
because they always, when you go to these things, they'll always ask you like, are you in the industry? Do you, and I am not a good liar. I'm a terrible liar. So I don't think I would be really like, I feel like I would just give it away because I'd be like
yeah.
answering the questionnaire to be like, ah, crap. Be like,
It's
I'll leave
me.
now. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I don't think I could do that. Um, but yeah, it's funny because like when I was a kid, like, I watched The Fog quite a bit.
Mhm.
Probably not as much as I watched like Halloween and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting to me too because when you look at The Fog as well in terms of like the scripts that, Deborah was working on at that time.
Mhm.
It is ultimately, obviously it's a story, about revenge and sort of answering, for the sins of the past and things like that. But it also is still a very female driven movie.
Right. It actually celebrated its 40th anniversary recently, and I actually wrote about how of all of the characters in the movie, you have Tom Atkins, you have Jamie Lee Curtis, you have the priest who gets guiltily drunk and disappears for most of the movie. You've got the mayor's wife looking for him with her assistant. But the only one that I think really kind of engenders herself to the audience the most is Adrienne Barbeau's Stevie, the DJ. She's like the focal point as far as I'm concerned. I think she's definitely the one that resonates most with the audience too.
Yeah, she's definitely the heart of the movie. And I think it's so interesting because, like, again, as a kid, like, I just thought it was like a creepy, weird, like, ghost story movie. And as an adult, like, you watch, you obviously see things a lot differently because you have perspective and things like that.
Yeah.
So which is why, like, if I hated something as a kid, I'll always go back and rewatch it as an adult because I'm like, well, how stupid was I? What did 10-year-old me know? Nothing. But the story of Stevie Wayne in that movie is really powerful because it's a single mother
Mhm.
who has had to deal with loss in her life, and she works in a pretty, sort of removed job from her son to the point where, his life is in jeopardy and there's nothing she can do about it. And there's like that desperation obviously when she sees the fog moving into her where her house is, and she can't get to him. She just can't.
Yeah.
Even if she could stop being on the radio, like the amount of time it would take for her to get from that lighthouse to her house,
Right.
it was futile. And so what I really love that scene when she's like desperately crying out on the radio and she's just like, somebody go to my house, somebody help my son. And I don't think Adrienne got enough credit for how great she is in that movie. Like I know she was, she's foxy and she has a great voice and, and she's badass and everything like that. But there is a real subtlety to how she plays that character. And I really like, as a kid, I liked that movie a lot. As an
Mhm.
adult, I love it. And I know people don't, sort of see it as quote unquote lesser Carpenter, but I'm here to say that you're wrong.
I think it's underrated for sure. I mean, watching it back then as a kid, I thought it was a bit slow, but now it's just to me more of like an auditory experience. Like everything is more sound than visual and more honoring the spirit of sitting around and telling ghost stories over the campfire, as captured in the opening scene. I mean, I feel like that's what this movie is like a love letter to that kind of oral passing of tales, scare each other silly, and that's what the fog is, which I mean is really kind of clever. And Stevie, she's the beating heart as far as she's got the most emotional stake, like the highest stakes of any character, but also she's caring about everybody else in the town too. Like she's relaying what's happening that she can see from her lighthouse, which also is something that Debra Hill scouted. Like, Stevie Wayne's a great character, but so is the lighthouse. And that was part of Debra Hill's job too, is like she's the one who location scouted that spot. So which
Yeah,
was all
I was gonna say we so years ago when they did WrestleMania up in San Jose. And so we were up there for like 4 or 5 days and we were like, oh, you know what we're gonna do while we go do this? We're gonna go to the lighthouse for the fog. Cause it was April, it's April, like, okay, it's spring. And
Mhm.
so we get there and like everybody's wearing winter coats and scarves and hats, and we're like,
Uh-oh.
what is going on? And we get out of the car and it is literally in the like beginning of April. It's like 30 degrees out there. It was freaking freezing. And I
Oh
was
my
like,
god.
oh God, so all we have are like a hoodie to wear. And we're like, all right, well, let's try this. And then when you park, it's like a mile and a half walk to get from where the
Oh.
parking lot is to the actual lighthouse. And we probably made it almost a half mile, and I had to turn back because we literally couldn't see because our eyes were watering so bad because the wind was whipping you.
Oh my gosh.
And every time that Adrian is like walking down those stairs to get to the lighthouse and everything, I could feel that chill in the air. And I was like, my God, I don't know how you people did this because it makes me cold when I see her do that. And you're like, oh, it's California. How cold can it be?
It's
It was
very.
holy crap. It was so freezing. I was like, at first I was like, why does everybody have coats on? You're like a bunch of overreactors. And I get out of the car and I was like, oh, I
Uh,
see. I was like, ah, okay. Because I was one of those California people who are like, I don't need a winter coat. What do you need a winter coat for when you live here? And I understand now. So we made it like a little bit of the way, and we had to turn back, and I was so bummed.
Did you at least get pictures?
No, because it was seriously like it was a mile and a half. Because like once you get on the trail to walk there,
Yeah.
it tells you like I forget what the name of the actual lighthouse is because I'm dumb. But it's like 1.5 miles, and I was like, oh, okay. And the only way you can get there is by walking. Like you can't take a vehicle down there or anything.
You
So
can't even see it from that distance, I'm assuming. Not really.
no, but it was nice because at least when we drove in, like some of the shots when she's driving to the lighthouse, we saw like I was like, oh wow, like this is you see that route in the fog. So at least there was that. But we do want to go back because I was like, oh, that was poor planning on our part. We just need to go when it's like really hot in the summer, so at least it'll only be somewhat like slightly cool there.
You won't have the wind whipping you in the face.
But that wind is terrifying. I'm like, and her hair still looked good afterwards, and I just don't even know.
Movie magic.
It was the power of hairspray back in the 80s. So, what's interesting to me also too is for some reason, I always thought this movie came out after Ghost Story when I was a kid. Because John Houseman, who you mentioned, obviously the movie opens with the ghost story. For some reason, I always thought he was brought into this movie because of his involvement with Ghost Story. Because who wouldn't want to hear a story from the guy who's in Ghost Story?
Right.
And it's like that's what drives that movie in particular. And then I was like, wait, no, Ghost Story comes out a year after The Fog. So now I'm like, was he cast in the Ghost Story because of how great he was at telling stories in The Fog? So it's always interesting to me, but I love old man ghost stories in horror movies.
Yeah.
I don't know why. But even as a kid, maybe it's because my mom watched Ghost Story a lot. But I think the opening with John Houseman is so fantastic, and it sets a perfect tone. And again, in a time where like if you're thinking about like where horror was in the beginning of the 80s, like you had Friday the 13th coming out in 1980, you had things like Maniac. Obviously people were starting to sort of push the boundaries a little bit.
Right.
And I like that The Fog sort of rolled those boundaries back. It was like, no, we can still tell classic stories. Which again, I think is sort of a lost art. I wish we had more movies that felt like that.
I agree. I also, really love that they were like, let's try something completely different than Halloween for their follow up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you can't get any further removed, from Halloween than something like Ghost Story. Although, I mean, I think they're both sort of atmospheric in their own way. Where if you put Michael Myers in The Fog, like it wouldn't feel weird because they're both sort of this eerie presence that's just kind of out of your peripheral view at some points.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just me reaching. I don't know.
You could, but yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think it's great. Like, again, as much as I love the stuff that Deborah was doing with John, I love the fact that she sort of broke out from that in the 80s.
Yeah.
And and obviously, as we mentioned, Clue was a huge part of that, because she was the one who really advocated into adapting it into a feature film, which, nowadays you can kind of make a movie out of anything, and, most of the times it'll work.
Right.
So to make a movie out of a board game in the mid 80s was a really big risk. And I'm so glad they did because it's one of my all-time favorites. But the fact that she worked so hard to maintain the spirit of that. And I remember when I was talking to the director, Jonathan Lynn, he was saying that, essentially like they're initially like the studio wanted it to be contemporary. And it was Deborah and John Landis who really pushed to keep it set, in the 50s because they just felt that was important to the spirit of the game, which I thought was really interesting because I think that's Paramount, if I'm remembering correctly. I mean, Paramount could have been like, "Well, forget it. We're just, we're gonna scrap this then." But ultimately, that cooler heads could prevail, and because of that, like we get this really fantastic movie that again is very character driven. For as
Yes.
much as it's zany and it's got great comedy bits, and Tim Curry is just running the show, like that movie just thrives on characters. And again, I think that's we love as we call them in our house talkies.
Yeah.
And I think Clue is very much of the sort of genesis of that love because that movie is very much a talkie, and probably one of the best.
She was that was a passion project of hers. I mean, I remember reading I think interviews or articles from probably even around the fog, like maybe an old Fangoria issue or something, where she had been thinking about that movie then. Like I read somewhere that she had even been trying to get that going since 79. So, that from 79 up until 85, she had been trying and trying and trying and finding the right people to line up, the right studio to get that off the ground. And like, that clearly she had a passion for it and it paid off. Like she knew full well what she was doing.
Yeah, no, and I think that's it takes somebody really strong to stick to their guns like that because ultimately like if something isn't going to work for you, how many years do you really sort of stick to those guns?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if for 2 years you're being told no, 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 it's like, well, do I just give up? And she, we're talking like 5 years
Yeah.
of her basically like persevering and being like, no, we should do this. And I know the movie wasn't a huge box office success, but obviously it sort of came into its own as a cult classic, which I think for me that's more important because I mean there's so many movies that came out in 1985.
Right.
And there's movies that were, huge financial, sort of success stories, but how many of them have legs,
Yeah, right.
and are movies that people still talk about 35 years later? There's a handful of them from 1985, obviously, the biggest probably being like Back to the Future and things like that. But like, when you look at sort of those in between movies, like Clue sort of stands out as this really interesting sort of, I don't want to say anti movie, but it was just it
Oh
was
yeah.
such it was such an enigma amongst that year of releases because there was just nothing else like that. And I almost sort of wonder in a way because like everything is so cyclical in the industry. Like obviously 2000s 2010s we were very much in the realm of the 80s, and now we're 30 years removed from the 90s, and now the
Right.
90s are coming back.
Yep.
And if you look at Clue, it was in the 80s but it was set in the 50s. Like, did it in some way sort of set the template where like every 30 years we have to start revisiting like this era of stories? I'm just, I'm probably way reaching there, but I'd like to think that it did, so I will say that it did.
We'll give her credit for that one. I'm okay with this.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy because like obviously, as we said, like she's, done a lot of stuff in horror, but she's done a lot of things elsewhere, in other genres. And you mentioned, Big Top Pee-wee, which of course, I remember seeing in theaters because I was obsessed with Pee-wee Herman.
I love Pee
Um,
Wee too.
yeah, and I was reading this story, and you probably found it because there's not a lot of stuff out there about Deborah, about where I guess Paul Rubens had come to set one day and was in a really bad mood.
Oh no.
And he was, probably not being great to be around. And I guess Deborah pulled him aside and basically said to him, like, you are the captain of this ship. So if you come in here and you're in a bad mood, she's like, it is going to affect everybody. She's like, everybody is going to feel that. And she's like, and I know it can be hard. She's like, but I need you to really be an example for everybody. And I know Paul Rubens, I think he mentioned like this, I think around the time that she passed away, where that was something, that was mentioned to him in the late 80s. And ever since, like he remembered that. And that was sort of his mantra was like, well, I need to make sure that I'm being there, and being present and not bringing in this stuff for other people to have to deal with. And I thought that was interesting because, first of all, It's Paul Rubens. You're playing Pee-wee. Like, how could you be in a bad mood? But obviously, people have
Well,
things
yeah.
going on, and stuff like that. But I always thought that was really interesting because she's right. I mean, if your biggest star and your biggest sort of creative force behind your movie is coming in with this cloud hanging over them, that
Yeah.
cloud is going to spread.
Right. I think that reminds me, obviously you were there for this, but when Halloween 2018 premiered at Fantastic Fest, and maybe it was the Q&A after, but it was Jamie Lee Curtis reflecting on Debra Hill and getting emotional just thinking about her and how she really wishes that she could be there for that to see, things kind of come full circle in a way. And I mean, I don't know that there is a single person in hindsight that knew her that had anything remotely negative to say. I mean, she was a leader and she was kind, but she was fierce. And it's like, I don't know her and I miss her.
Yeah, it's tough because like I sit there and I think about like, obviously we're both women in a very male driven industry.
Mm-hmm.
And this I'm not gender bashing or anything like that. But it is tough because like a lot of times like I would, especially in the early days because I'm old, but I would go to junkets and like it was seriously like 90% guys. And the women who would be there, and again, this isn't saying that they're any lesser than anybody else, but like they were on camera talent for like, for like access or sort of TV shows.
Right.
And it was kind of a bummer because like I would go in and like, of course I'm gonna talk to guys, whatever, it's nothing like that, but like there just weren't a ton of women there. And it's definitely changed, I think, in our industry, which is great because I'm loving the fact that we are getting so many more female voices out there. But I have to imagine like, for as lonely as it kind of was at the beginning, because like when I started, like I think there was when I came in, like there was Jovanka doing stuff with Rue Morgue, Stacey Wilson. I think this is even pre Rebecca at Fangoria. So there was, when there was sort of like women that I could look up to in the industry that we're in, there was only like a couple. And I'm so grateful now that like things have changed for us where like, when we have to go and talk about like amplifying female voices on Twitter, and I was like, oh shit, I am gonna forget a ton of people because there's so many great women out there working now.
I know.
And I would have to hope, as much as we still need to make strides in the industry, if in Hollywood, you look at when Deborah was producing and things like that, like there was, maybe two or three really prevalent, prominent female producers working at that time, and there's way more now. But
Right.
there still needs to be more, obviously.
Right.
But I wish Deborah could have seen that at least we're making some strides.
Yeah, I think it's not quite what she had hoped, but it's definitely getting there. The thing that bums me out though is that it's like I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she was in the process of directing when she passed. Like I think there was some kind of romantic thriller that she was going to be tackling. And I even vaguely remember reading a long time ago that she might have even considered Clue being something that she would helm maybe early on. So it bums me out that she never got to do that, but she did so much door opening that allowed for, women in her wake to do so. But it does bum me out that she didn't really get to fulfill that dream of hers.
Yeah, I know she got to do a couple of TV episodes because I know she worked on Monsters, and I think there was. Oh, let me see if IMDb can work quickly for me. Yes, she also did an episode of Dream On, with National Treasure Brian Benben. I just loved saying that name when I was a kid. I was like, wait,
Ben Ben.
yeah, it's like three names all in a row, Brian Benben. But I know she had a script that she really had wanted to direct, and I mean, and she was producing pretty much up until she died because
Yeah.
she was working at World Trade Center with Oliver Stone, basically from her sickbed. And that to me is like such a testament to who she was, because I mean, and I don't say these things to like offer up salacious details or anything like that, but her circumstances around her cancer were really horrific. She had both of her legs amputated, which I can't even freaking imagine. And yet she didn't let it stop her. Like for me, that probably would have been it. You know what I mean? Like I would have been like, okay, fine, I'm done. And she
Right.
didn't, and she was, basically producing up until the point where she just couldn't do anything anymore. And that's such a testament to who she was because, you know, God forbid anything happens, but I don't know, as much as I work, I don't know that like in those final months, like I would want to be focused on work. And this industry meant so much to her that she was,
Right.
and that's again, it's just like, it's such a testament to who she was, where she's like, I still want to get this movie done for Oliver Stone, and we should be like balls deep in like retrospectives and documentaries. I know there was years ago, there was talk of a Debra Hill documentary. I don't know what happened, but like,
Somebody
let's
needs to
do
do that.
this. Like, what
Yeah.
the hell? Like, I'll do it. Like, let's just do it. Somebody has to do this because, her story needs to be out there. She was such an important part of this industry for 3 decades, technically four, I guess. Because I know she did a little bit of producing in the 2000s, but like, who else was doing that? The way that she was. And it's just really sad that she isn't here and she wasn't able to enjoy the return of Laurie. Especially for how hard she fought to bring Jamie Lee into the original Halloween.
And what a
Um,
very like savvy business decision that was.
oh, I know. And it's interesting to me now because I'm like, I think about this. I'm like, well, who wouldn't have cast Jamie Lee Curtis back then? Because she was a rising star and she had, powerhouse parents in Hollywood and things like that. But it was still a gamble, which kind of blows my mind. And, look at the career that Jamie Lee had because of Halloween,
Yep.
you know, and I just wish Deborah could have been there to know, what ultimately she was able to achieve with that. I mean, because every little decision in that movie ultimately led to something bigger and greater for everybody.
Yep. That was a career launcher for pretty much everybody involved, just about.
Yeah, I mean, like, you have Nick Castle goes on to directing, like, obviously John had the career that he had, PJ, so like the cast, like, everybody was, came out of that movie a winner and ultimately it ended up launching one of the biggest franchises ever in a
That
time when
is,
there was no franchises.
yeah,
So,
that's still going strong. I mean, we have Friday the 13th wrapped up in lawsuits, and who knows what's happening with A Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, I guess Child's Play, but Child's Play came like a decade later. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of obviously it's sad that she's not here, but at the same time there's something really kind of sentimental and touching that the family that she helped foster and create in 78 is back together, you
yeah.
know, in 2020. They're making a trilogy. The castle's still there. John Carpenter, like Jamie Lee Curtis, these people who knew and worked with her and loved her, I'm sure think about her constantly on that
Yeah.
set.
No, absolutely. And I think that's such an interesting point too, because, I mean, again, I love John, but he's been very, very famously known for when it comes to people sort of doing things with properties that he originally created, with,
Hmm.
remakes and things like that, where, he's cool with just cashing the check and going on his merry way.
Right.
Um, and to actually keep him engaged in a new series of Halloween movies, like to me, I'm like, wow, like you had to know that it had to be, there had to be something to that for John to care. Now, again, I don't mean it that way, but like,
Right.
he obviously he's always said like my favorite kind of remakes are the ones that pay me.
Yes.
And again, that's not a knock against him. He's said it himself, but like ultimately, for him to want to come back to this world, after sort of being pushed out for so many years, and not only be engaged with David Gordon Green, the director, but also like coming in and wanting to do the score and just really being a part of it again. Like that makes me so happy as a fan, and
Yeah.
I wish Deborah would have been able to do that too. But I think that they, in terms of putting the focus back on Laurie, the way that Halloween 2018 did. Again, I know people have issues with the movie. I freaking love it. I have no issues really with it. I don't even mind this Dr. Sartain stuff. Like it doesn't bother me whatsoever. But I love Laurie's arc in that movie, and I think it's really powerful, and I think it would have ultimately been really satisfying for Deborah to see it.
Same for, Jamie Lee Curtis. For her to come back too is also a big deal. Like John Carpenter more so clearly, but she'd kind of done everything that there was and had some horrible ends. Was it Resurrection? Like that's
Oh
the type
yeah.
of movie that you would pretty sure she'd wring her hands and walk away, and that's that. So like to bring it back into the fold and give her such a like the arc that I think she wanted with H2O. So yeah, I mean for everybody to come back says a lot, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if you were going to do your ideal double feature seems easy, but if you're going to do your ideal Deborah Hill like triple feature, what three films would you pick?
Okay. This is tough because do you go like what do we is this like for what we want to show people as a kind of intro to Deborah Hill or just our personal favorites? I gotta hone this down because I can go so many different ways. Um, I think I'm gonna do Dead Zone for
Okay.
sure. I could, I'm not gonna do Halloween in the Fog because I think everybody is very familiar with those. So I think I'm gonna do a little bit different. So like the Dead Zone because more people should see it or revisit it, and it's kind of the first movie where she's out on her own away from her partnership with John Carpenter. And I think Clue because that was such her passion project. And even it's a classic now, and it's totally narratively the structure of it is unique. Like you can't really do that so much these days or pull it off well. So between the structure, between just it being a classic and being like her baby that it took her so long, I'm gonna go with Clue. So those two for sure. And I don't know. Maybe The Fisher King,
Okay.
which
I
it's
like
an
it.
odd one, but there's this whole side story that I always loved, in that like the director had some elaborate scene that he wanted to do last minute that would have involved 1,000 extras, and it was Hill that figured out how to make it happen. So for her, for it, like a whole Deborah Hill trilogy in her honor, like I think I'm gonna go with those three.
I like it. I like it. I would do Escape from New York because I think obviously amongst like our circles, everybody knows and loves Escape from New York.
Yeah.
I think once you get out of our circles, I don't think people know it as well, which is a damn shame. So I'll advocate for Escape from New York. I would also do Clue because I have to. I think my third one, and this sounds so crazy, but there was this. I always because I grew up watching like a lot of like the old 50s like giant monster type movies and things like that.
Hmm.
And I really, really loved there was the TV movie version of Attack of the 50-Foot Woman,
Very nice.
but it was directed by Christopher Guest, which I think is amazing. And again, I didn't even realize that probably until I want to say like 10, 15 years ago. Who obviously, of course, is married to Jamie Lee Curtis, which I think is amazing. But I remember when that movie was being sort of advertised on TV, and I was like, wait, they're making an Attack of the 50-Foot Woman movie with Daryl Hannah. And I was like, okay, I'm in. And I really love that movie. And again, I don't think it gets quite talked about enough.
No.
I would have to talk. I would have to throw in that, just because I'm like one. I wish Christopher Guest had directed a lot more. I'm looking really quick to see how much he might have done. I mean, obviously his acting career was unparalleled. Oh, I guess he did direct quite a bit. Well, he did. Oh, obviously, A Mighty Wind and Best in Show in those movies. But yeah, I think it seems like in terms of movies, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman was kind of the beginning for him. So had he maybe not have gotten that opportunity, we may not have gotten Waiting for Guffman and
Yeah.
all these fun little wacky comedies over the years. So those would be my three. But
There's
yeah,
it's so hard because I'm like, well, shoot, now I want to go back and swap one out for Assault on Precinct 13 just because that's how she crossed paths with John Carpenter, and she was a assistant editor and script supervisor. It's kind of
right?
there's too many. There's too many.
I
When
know.
are we going to start lining up interviews for our Debra Hill documentary?
Yeah, I think as soon as we're done here, we have to start. It's interesting too because when I was looking, I was like, I didn't realize like she worked, and I only saw this movie a couple of years ago because it was on like Amazon Prime or whatever, and I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I remember this title, and I watched it, and it's okay, but I didn't even realize like she was script supervisor on Satan's Cheerleaders.
See, these are like stories that need to come out.
Yeah, and I was like, wait, really? And I was like, because it's okay.
Yeah.
It's, it's not a great movie, but I was just like, but it's a title that I've known for so long. But yeah, it popped up on Prime like a couple years ago, and I was like, all right, let's see what happens. Like, I'm already paying for Prime, whatever. And it's not great, but I was like, wow, she actually worked on it though. That's kind of cool. Yeah, there's some deep cuts we could definitely go into here. But I think that's a testament to who Deborah was. I think it was for as easy as it would have been to pinpoint her career specifically in horror and just keep her in that realm, she was able to really do everything, and obviously she did a bunch of stuff with Disney over the years. And I think that's just a testament to who she was and the power of her abilities, in this industry. Again, when, most women weren't being taken seriously. So I think that's pretty rad.
I agree.
Yeah. So I think that's probably a good note to end on. Other than the fact that we're going to go and start working on our Debra Hill documentary now, because somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, might as well be us.
I think when I was doing like research, I think it was announced like 6 years ago. Like I think it was the beginning of 2014 is when it was like first announced. So I'm like, I feel like we should have something by now.
We should. I mean, like, how hard is it?
Yeah.
I-
Like
Like,
go do some interviews. That's
yeah,
all.
there are plenty of people. I mean, when I saw, I did the set visit for Hellfest, which was a movie that nobody really saw, and that's fine. But Gail Ann Hurd specifically was like, "This is my love letter to Debra Hill."
I really liked Hellfest.
I
Maybe I'm
I
just
thought
a
it was
minority.
cute.
It's fun. I was better than I was expecting because I didn't get to see it in theaters because I remember it came out in October and there's like all kinds of craziness going on. And,
Yeah.
it's unless you're specifically asked to cover something. I think it was, but I think, you know what it was? I think the junket was the same time as Fantastic Fest and we had somebody else cover it.
Yeah.
So I just didn't get a chance to see it. And so I remember renting it like in January and I was like, that was really fun. Like I just felt like I was kind of like a kid again. So I could totally see how this would be something that was like, Gail's, you know, tribute to the stuff that Deborah was doing in her career. So I could see that. So yeah, I think it's up to all of us to keep Deborah's memories and legacy alive. But yeah, somebody really needs to get on that.
Maybe we do. Maybe, if not a documentary, then maybe a book. I don't something, but I feel like there's way too much of her life and her work that, isn't covered. There's we know a lot of John Carpenter because he's actually spoken about her and the people involved on those movies, but like all of her, you look at her IMDb and there's a lot of her stuff. Like producers, like you said, nowadays people like Blum are they're like characters, but for the longest time producers were just like the quiet people behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if we do this documentary now that we're really going to do this, we're planning our world domination here, Megan.
Yeah.
We should get everybody in the documentary to wear the Tease on Scene
Oh yes,
T-shirt.
I have one.
I do too. I love it. And it's weird because I get excited when I see it out in the wild, but then also I'm like, hey, maybe I'm like, why are you wearing that shirt? Like, this is my shirt. But I ultimately do get excited. I think I probably saw it at least 10 times at Fantastic Fest last year.
Oh,
So it's all good. But I actually when I did the In Search of Darkness documentary, I made sure to wear my Deborah Hill shirt because I wanted to show her a little love.
very nice.
Yeah. So, but I think this was awesome, and now we have all these things to plan out now. So thankfully we have nothing else going on in our lives that we can just
Nothing.
drop everything and do this. But yeah, no, this was really fantastic to have you on and do this conversation in celebration of Deborah and Megan. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invite. Chatting with you
Yeah.
is always a blast.
Oh well, thank you so much. Are you kidding? I know you put up with me for like a whole day at Sundance, and
Oh, shut up. It was
I was
fun.
like, this poor girl's like gonna be like, oh my god.
No,
You're like,
no.
oh. We have
Not
another
at all.
screening together. Oh,
No, it was a very fun day. And honestly, sometimes doing a fest alone can be lonely. And it's like when you bond with somebody and like we're friends and you get to spend the day with a friend who's usually way too busy for anything. It was great.
I know it's like it's one of those where like sometimes I'll be at home and like with screenings and things like that going on, and Brian, my other half, he'll be like, he's like, our date nights end up becoming like when we go to screenings because that's just literally like the schedule that I keep sometimes.
Yeah.
But you do what you got to do. So, but no, it was great getting to hang out with you at Sundance. So and I was glad we got to do this as well. So, yeah, now we have a whole documentary to plan. So,
Hell
you
yeah.
know.
We get some kind of Debra Hill like commemoration book or series of something or documentary. I'm like, we're gonna do it. I don't know how and when or the mechanics of it, but we're doing it.
We are, damn it.
It's like super team honoring a super woman.
Definitely. So Megan, for those listening, where can they find you online?
I can be found on Twitter at Haunted Meg, and definitely if you go to Bloody Disgusting, yeah, I'm there.
All over the place.
All over the place. Just
Awesome.
click. It's probably me.
Wonderful. And then for obviously for those of you listening, to find out more about Corpse Club, you can visit us over at corpseclub.com. For all your daily news, reviews, and interviews, you can go over to dailydead.com or find us on Twitter over at Daily Dead News. A huge thank you to Brian, our editor, for making me sound somewhat intelligent. I always say that because it's always somewhat intelligent. And for those of you who've been supporting us since the beginning, we really appreciate it. We would not be here without you guys. And until next time, everybody, stay scary.